Let's get the principals to the table and the staff against the wall. And let me be clear with whoever's running protocol. No civilian tells me what to do in my own negotiation." Colonel Grant Holloway said it to the room, and to no one, the way a man speaks when he has never once been asked to wait. He was the only uniform in a room that had agreed, weeks ago, to wear none. Army service uniform, dark blue, the silver eagles of a full colonel bright on his shoulders, every crease sharp enough to file a complaint. He had crossed one hallway to be here. He carried himself like he had crossed an ocean. The room was a long stone hall in a neutral country's lakeside estate. Tall windows down one side, the water beyond them flat and gray in the morning. A single long table, dark wood, 20 feet of it. Map, overlays pinned to the far wall. A carafe of coffee no one had touched. The kind of room where wars were supposed to be ended quietly, so that no one had to admit one had been fought. At the wall stood a woman in a charcoal suit, studying the overlays, mid-40s. Dark hair pulled back into a low, plain knot. No insignia, no badge that meant anything in this building. She had her hands folded behind her and her weight even on both feet, and she did not turn when Holloway spoke. He took her in with one glance and dismissed her in less. State, he decided. A note-taker. The lady who would retype the annex. He gestured at her without looking. 2 fingers, the way you wave a server toward a spill. "Ma'am, against the wall's fine. We'll call you if we need something typed." She stepped back from the map. That was all. No reply. No color in her face. She moved 3 feet to the side, out of his line to the overlays, and went still again. She had crossed 3 borders to be in this room. He had crossed 1 hallway, and already he owned it. Her name was Naomi Vance. She was a colonel in the United States Army, 46 years old, a foreign area officer who had spent 20 years learning the languages and the griefs of this particular corner of the world. She was the chief of this delegation. She carried, in a folder she had not yet opened, a letter signed by the secretary, giving her the authority to speak for the United States in this room. She watched the man in the uniform take the head of the table, and she chose, for now, to let him have it. The opposing delegation filed in. 6 men and 2 women in dark civilian suits, faces closed, the body language of people who had buried more than they had ever surrendered. The neutral host's protocol officer began the introductions. Holloway talked over him, half rising to shake hands across the table, naming himself first, loudly, twice, mispronouncing 2 of the names and correcting no one's impression that it mattered. Vance said nothing. Her eyes moved once around the table. She named every face in her head, who sat where, who deferred to whom, whose hands were steady and whose were not, which of them had not slept. 2 of the opposing aides murmured to each other in their own language, low, not meant to be heard. Something about the man in the uniform, something not kind. A word that meant, roughly, peacock. Vance's gaze flicked to the speaker, a half-second before the interpreter at her own table even lifted his pen. She let nothing show. But she had heard it, and she had understood it, and the understanding settled into her like a stone into still water. A man lowered himself into the chair beside the empty seat at the head of the table. The seat no one had claimed but Holloway. Gideon Halpern, 57, gray at the temples, a State Department political advisor who had staffed Naomi Vance across 9 years and 3 of the worst places on the map. He looked at her, standing against the wall in her plain suit, and he understood exactly what she was doing, and he did not like it, and he said nothing about it. He had learned long ago that she was usually 3 moves ahead of his objections. He wrote 1 line on his pad instead. "You want your chair, Colonel?" he asked her, low, when Holloway turned away to bark at his own staff. "Not yet," Vance said. He just told the whole room you'd be retyping the annex. I know. Let him. Across the table, a man watched the American side. Major Anton Vasic, aide and translator to a general who had not yet arrived. He was a careful man with careful eyes, and he watched the loud colonel in the bright uniform for exactly as long as courtesy required. And then he watched the quiet woman against the wall, and he kept watching her, far longer than he watched the man who thought he ran the room. Holloway settled into the head of the table and squared his folder in front of him, certain, the way only a man who has misread everything can be certain. Against the wall, Naomi Vance folded her hands in front of her and went still. And beside the empty chair, Gideon Halpern looked once more at the line he had written on his pad and underlined it twice. The first session began on a map, which is where wars usually start and almost never end. Holloway stood at the overlays with a pointer and laid out the force separation line, the boundary that would hold the two armies apart while the ink dried. He spoke in feature names, confident, jabbing at the big map. The buffer would run along the eastern ridge, he said. Here, the high ground. It was, he added, the militarily sound choice, and he said militarily sound, the way some men say, Amen. The opposing aides stiffened. They conferred sharply, quietly, in their language. Vasic's jaw tightened by a single degree. Vance, at the wall, saw it before anyone at her own table did. She knew that ridge. She knew the valley under it, the way she knew the back of her own hand, because 12 years ago she had walked it in the dark, with a radio she could not use, and a man she could not save. She knew which fields flooded and which held. She knew the name of the schoolteacher who had kept 40 children in a cellar for 9 days on rainwater and dried beans. She knew that the bridge the planners loved had been gone since the spring of 2015, blown by retreating engineers, and that the only crossing now was a ford. A child could wade in August, and a current that took grown men in March. The line Holloway had just drawn did not run along the ridge. On his overlay, it did. On the ground, it ran 800 meters to the south, and it put the buffer zone squarely across a valley where 4,000 people still lived. Draw it where he had drawn it, and the first farmer who crossed his own field to fetch water would restart the war. She did not raise her hand. She spoke to the room flatly, the way numbers are spoken when they are simply true. The separation line the colonel has is from the old overlay, she said. It's wrong by 800 meters. The true line is the far bank of the river, grid line running roughly north to south, not the near one. The near bank is inhabited, roughly 4,000 civilians in the valley below the ridge, 2 villages, a clinic, 1 bridge. Put the buffer where it's marked, and you've fenced 4,000 people inside it, and you've put the clinic on the wrong side of the wire. The room turned, not toward Holloway, toward her. Numbers do not argue, they only correct. Vasic said something low to the woman beside him. Vance answered it, in their language, before the interpreter at her own table had even found the phrase. 3 quiet words that confirmed the grid and closed the point. The opposing side eased back into their chairs, a fraction. The temperature in the room dropped half a degree. Holloway felt the room move and mistook which way. He glanced at the overlay, found the error, and folded it instantly into his own authority. Right, he said, as my staff just confirmed, the far bank. We'll annotate it. He capped and uncapped his pen. Good catch by the team. Halpern did not look up from his pad. They heard her, he murmured, to no one. He didn't. Vance returned to the wall. She had given the room a fact, and let a man take the credit, and she had done it without the smallest change in her face, because the fact was what mattered, and the credit was not. A corridor for 4,000 people had just been moved off a death trap, whose name went in the minutes beside the correction was, to her, a thing of no weight at all. The session ground on through the morning. Holloway pressed and pushed and treated each concession as a victory and each delay as an insult. Twice more, he stated something the ground itself contradicted. A bridge that no longer stood. A road that flooded each spring. Twice more, a quiet voice from the wall set it right, naming the year the bridge fell and the months the road went under. And twice more, he absorbed the correction as if he had authored it. The opposing delegation began, subtly, to address their answers past him. Not to him. Toward the woman who kept being right. He did not notice. He was a man who measured a room by who was talking, and by that measure, he was winning every minute of the day. Across the table, when the session finally broke for the noon hour, Major Vasich capped his pen, wrote a single word on his pad, and looked up at the woman standing by the wall. He held her eyes for a moment. Then he gave her the smallest nod a man can give, and still mean it. To her. Only to her. By the second day, the slights had stopped being accidents and started being a system. Holloway had decided what Naomi Vance was, and now he arranged the room to match. She was the lady from State. She was the one you handed things to. In front of his staff, he held out the marked-up annex, the entire ceasefire framework, 60 pages, 3 weeks of work by 4 governments, and asked her to get this retyped clean for the principals. She took it without a word. She did not tell him that the principal he meant to hand the clean copy to was herself. She simply took the folder, because inside that folder was a problem she needed to read, and he had just handed it to her with his own hands. And double-space the corridor section, he added, already turning away. I want room to mark it up. Of course, she said. There was a working lunch on the terrace at noon. The principals only, Holloway said. He held court at the long outdoor table over the lake, telling a story about a previous posting, the kind that ended with him being right and a superior being wrong, loud enough to carry through the open doors. Lieutenant Dario Pell, 25, a junior aide and linguist on the American side, sat near the end of that table and felt something wrong he could not name. He counted the chairs. He counted the people. The chief of delegation was not among them. He looked back through the tall windows and saw her alone in the anteroom with the 60-page annex open in front of her, eating nothing. And he opened his mouth to say something to the colonel beside him. And then he was 25, and the colonels were laughing, and he closed it again. He would remember closing it. In the anteroom, Naomi Vance found the clause. It was on page 41, buried in the corridor protocols, a small resequencing of who could close the humanitarian corridor and when. As written, either side could shut the corridor for security reasons, on its own say-so, without notice, without joint review, indefinitely. It read like procedure. It was a trap door. A corridor that could be slammed shut on a whim by either army was not a corridor at all. It was a held breath. It was 4,000 people waiting on the mood of whichever sentry had the worst morning, the worst orders, the worst week. A war can be lost in a subordinate clause. She had watched it happen, more than once, to people who never knew the sentence that killed them. A ceasefire 2 countries away had died on the word, temporary. A prisoner release had collapsed on a comma. She had learned to read these documents the way an explosives technician reads a doorway, slowly, from the edges in, assuming that the most ordinary-looking thing in the room is the one built to take your hands off. The men on the terrace read for what a clause said. She read for what it would let someone do, on the worst night, in the worst mood, with the worst orders, when no one important was watching and 4,000 people were. She marked the clause in pencil, a single light line in the margin. She did not raise it. Not yet. She set the annex aside and folded her hands and looked out at the lake, and she did the hardest thing a competent person can do in a room full of confident ones. She waited. Halpern found her there. "You could just tell him," he said. "He's not ready to hear it from a civilian," she said. "Give it a day. You're not a civilian. He doesn't know that yet." A small breath, not quite a smile. "When he finds out, I want him to remember that I was right before he knew who I was, not after. A man who's corrected by his equal learns nothing. A man who finds out he was schooled by someone he wrote off, that he remembers for the rest of his career." Halpern sat down across from her and read the penciled clause upside down. "A corridor that can be closed on a whim. That's not a corridor. It's a trap with a ribbon on it," she said. "Say so to him now, and he'll defend it because I said it. Say it to him tomorrow, with the general in the building, and he might actually fix it. Then say so. Not yet. If you have ever sat in a room and watched someone louder than you take credit for the thing you got right, if you have ever had to decide whether to win the argument or win the outcome, you already know the kind of patience this took. If a story about that patience is worth your time, take 1 second now and subscribe. It tells the people who make this channel that quiet competence is worth telling stories about." She folded the annex closed over the clause that could have killed thousands, slid it into her case, and reached over and switched off the anteroom light. Through the window on the terrace, the men were toasting a deal that was not yet a deal. She let them. The light went out. She waited. By the third morning, the talks had stalled, and Holloway had decided the problem was everyone but himself. He sat in his room with his small staff and drafted a message back to his headquarters. The delegation was too big, he wrote. Too many cooks, too many state elements slowing the military business with process. He recommended the delegation be tightened, fewer advisors, fewer note-takers, a leaner team that could move fast and speak with one voice. His voice. "We're losing because there are too many cooks," he told his staff, pacing the short length of the room. "I want decision-makers in that room, not note-takers. Send it tonight. My signature." He meant her. He did not write her name, because to him she did not quite have one. He wrote the state advisory element, and he meant the woman who had corrected his map twice and his annex once, and he moved on paper to send her home. It is worth saying plainly, Grant Holloway was not a cruel man. He did not fabricate a charge. He did not plant a lie or forge a complaint. He believed, with the whole force of a competent 26-year career, that wars were won by pressure and lost by softness, and he had looked at a quiet woman in a borrowed-looking suit and seen softness, and everything he did after that followed honestly from a single honest mistake. That is the most dangerous kind of wrong, the kind that thinks it is doing its job, the kind that signs the message and sleeps well. The opposing delegation returned to the table cold. Vasek did not sit. He stood and read a short statement, his voice level, his eyes on the middle distance. The opposing side, he said, had reviewed the conduct of the talks. They were not satisfied with the current American lead. They would not continue under it. He folded the paper when he finished and set it on the table, squared, deliberate. A silence opened in the room. And then, beneath the formal words, in the low aside between two of his colleagues, in a language no one at the American table spoke but one, Vance heard the rest of it. 5 words, traded fast and quiet. They were waiting, the aside said, for the one from the river. She did not move, but something behind her eyes changed, the way the surface of water changes when something very large turns over far below it. 2 words of it in a language no one at her own table spoke, and the floor shifted under the room. Holloway heard only the formal statement, and bristled at it. "With respect," he started. "You don't get to pick our—" Vasich had already finished. He sat. The opposing lead looked, for one short moment, not at Holloway, but past him, at the wall, before lowering his eyes to his papers. In the hallway after, Halpern was quietly urgent. "Do you know what they just asked for?" he said. "I know exactly what they asked for," Vance said. "They said they'll continue, but only on a condition, and they wouldn't say the condition out loud in the room. They said it sideways. I caught maybe half of it. Something about a river. I caught all of it. Naomi. Tomorrow, Gideon." Back in the room, Holloway turned to his staff, baffled, almost laughing. "What is this one at the river business? Is that a code name? An operation? Somebody find out who they're talking about. I want a name by tonight." His aides looked at one another. None of them knew. None of them could tell him. They opened laptops and searched files that did not contain her. And 10 feet away, the woman he had moved that morning to send home stood at the tall windows with her hands folded behind her, looking out at the gray water. At a far bank she could see when she closed her eyes and said nothing at all. Halpern got Holloway alone that evening, off the record, in the corner of the empty dining room where the staff had cleared the plates and gone. He chose his words the way you choose your footing on ice. "I'm going to give you something for free," Halpern said. "If she is who I think she is, and I have staffed her for 9 years, in worse rooms than this, you want to walk this back. Tonight. Before tomorrow morning." Holloway poured himself coffee and did not offer any. "If who is who you think she is. The chief of your delegation." "The chief of my delegation," Holloway said, "is a 40-something in a gray suit who keeps correcting my maps and getting handed the typing." He said it without heat. He genuinely believed it. And belief without heat is the hardest belief to move. "I've met 100 of her. Sharp, useful, knows the file cold, not the one who closes the deal. That's a different animal. And I've been that animal for 26 years. "Yes," Halpern said. "She's very useful." He let a beat go by. "Ask yourself how she keeps being right." Holloway didn't answer. "Ask yourself," Halpern went on gently, "why the other side won't talk under your lead. But they'll come back to the table for a condition they won't even say in front of you. Ask yourself who they're waiting for." "You're a smart man, Colonel. You've just decided in advance what the answer can't be." "Your state," Holloway said. "You protect your own. I understand it. I'd do the same for one of mine." He drank his coffee. "But this is a military settlement now, and it needs a military lead. And tomorrow, it's getting one." Halpern looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at a man standing on a rail crossing who cannot yet hear the train. "All right," he said, and let it go, because some men will only learn a thing one way, and the only mercy left was to make sure he was in the room when he learned it. Out on the terrace, in the dusk, Naomi Vance sat with Anton Vasich. They did not negotiate. That was the secret of it. She did not bargain. She did not press. She put no paper on the table. She listened. She asked, in his language, about his daughter, and got the name right, Mira, because she had read it in a file 12 years old and had never let it go. She let him talk about a winter and a road and a brother who had not come home. She gave him the one thing the loud room could not, the sense of being heard by someone who had earned the right to hear it. "He trusts you," Vasich said at last, meaning the general, the man not yet arrived. "He has trusted no American in his life. You, he trusts. Do you know how rare that is, Colonel? In 30 years, I have not seen it once." "He shouldn't trust me lightly," Vance said. "Tell him I said that." "That," said Vasich, "is exactly why he does." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the iron table, watching the lake. I was at the river too, you know. A captain then. I stood beside him on the far bank and I told him we should fire, that it was a trick, that no officer gives back her enemies dead unless she is buying something with them. He did not fire. He said, "Watch what she does with the dead, Anton. A soldier who buys nothing tells you everything." Vasich looked up. "You bought nothing. We have remembered it for 12 years. Tonight you will see what the memory was worth." She let the silence hold what neither of them needed to say, and across the dark water, a light came on in a house, and then another. When he rose to go, the talks were alive again. He told his own delegation lead, quietly, that they could give the Americans one more day. He did not say why. He did not have to. Inside, Pill caught Halpern in the corridor. "Sir," the lieutenant said. "Who is she?" "Colonel Vance. Everyone keeps deferring to her sideways, and the colonel keeps—" "Tomorrow," Halpern said. "You won't have to ask." He clapped the young man once on the shoulder. "He's about to find out who he benched. You'll want to be in the room when he does. If you want to be in the room when he does too, you already know what to do. Stay with it. We're close now. This is the part of the story the whole thing has been walking toward." Holloway watched through the window as Vance came in from the terrace, having somehow, again, kept his talks from dying. For one moment, something uncertain crossed his face. Then he squared his shoulders, turned to his staff, and said he would handle their general himself tomorrow, man to man, soldier to soldier. That night, alone in her quarters, Naomi Vance let the past in. It was the only time in the whole long week that she let herself stop being still. She opened her case and took out a phrasebook. Small, the spine taped twice, the cover worn to softness by a hand that was no longer alive. Inside, in the margins, a child's careful handwriting in 2 languages, words traded back and forth between a man and the children he translated for, in the years when translating for the Americans was the most dangerous job in the country and the worst paid. She had carried it across 3 deployments and 12 years. Stefan's book, the only thing of his that had ever come home. She was 34, the year of the river, a major then. They had sent her forward to support an assault into a town on the near bank, a town full of families, pinned between 2 armies. The kind of place that does not appear in the after-action report by name, only by number, only by the count of what was left. The order was to take it, to push the assault through the streets where the families were. The planners had drawn it clean on a map 800 meters from the truth, the way planners do. She had stood on the near bank with the order in her ear and the town in her eyes, and she had done the thing they never forgave her for. She had called the ceasefire on her own authority. She had keyed the radio and said the words that ended her chance at general and saved a town. And then she had walked out into the open, under a white cloth, tied to a stick, with Stefan beside her. The 2 of them small and slow in the gray light, into the gun sights of 2 armies that had every reason to fire. And the guns had held. For 9 hours, she ran a corridor that no one had ordered, and no one would later admit existed. Civilians crossed, old men carried on doors, a woman with twins, a boy leading a blind grandfather by the sleeve. The wounded crossed, hers and theirs, and she made no distinction, and that was the part command could not stomach. The enemy's dead she had carried back across and laid out on the far bank with their faces covered, an honor no one had ordered her to give, because she had decided that a war you survive by becoming the thing you are fighting is a war already lost. In the 8th hour, a single shot. Stefan was carrying a wounded child to the far side, the white cloth in his free hand, and the shot took him, and he went down, still holding the cloth, still shielding the child, and the child lived, and Stefan did not. She had held him on the gravel in the open, while both armies watched, and neither fired. and she had finished carrying the child across herself, her hands not quite steady, the white cloth dark now where she gripped it. They wanted a town taken. She gave them a town still standing. Command never forgave her for it. The people in it did. There were children alive in that valley tonight who were named for a woman they had never met, in a language she had learned to keep a promise in. She remembered the quiet of it most of all, not the shot, the quiet around the shot. 9 hours in which 2 armies, who had spent a year teaching each other every cruelty they knew, simply held still and let a corridor exist, because one person had walked into the open and refused, on her own authority, to be the kind of soldier the war wanted her to be. She remembered counting them across. 219 civilians, 31 wounded, 11 dead carried back the other way with their faces covered. She had kept the count in a green notebook for 12 years, and she could still say the numbers in the dark, because numbers were the only prayer she had ever trusted. On the far bank that day, a man had lowered his field glasses. The enemy field commander, a colonel then, named Victor Meraz, had watched an American officer keep her word at the cost of her own people. He had ordered his men to hold their fire until she was back across the water. And then, through the smoke, the two of them had simply looked at each other across the river, enemies who would not meet again for 12 years. And something had passed between them that no treaty had a line for. He had not forgotten. She set Stefan's phrase book on the desk and squared it to the edge with 2 fingers, the way she squared everything. She turned out the light. Across the border, in the dark, a motorcade was already moving toward the lake. The last session before the general arrived was the one where Holloway finally crossed the line he could not uncross. He had decided pressure would break the logjam, and he applied it the way he knew how, mid-session, without warning, without consulting the woman whose talks they were. He delivered an ultimatum across the table. Accept the current annex, Clause 41, trapdoor and all, by morning, or the United States delegation would walk. He said it standing, both hands flat on the table, leaning into it, the way he had leaned into rooms his whole career and made them fold. The opposing delegation began to stand. Chairs scraped on stone. Vazic's face shut like a door. A week of held breath went out of the room all at once, and the war, which had been 3 feet from ending, took one long step back toward the dark. He had spent an hour building it. He broke it in a sentence. And Naomi Vance stepped off the wall. It was the first time she had moved toward the table in 3 days. She crossed to it without hurry and spoke. 8 words in their language, directly to Vacic, low and even. She did not contradict Holloway. She did not undercut him in front of the room, which would have cost him the face he would need later. She reframed him. She told them, in effect, that the colonel was tired, that the hour was late, that no one in this room wanted to be remembered for a sentence said at the end of a long and difficult day. She gave them a reason to sit, that let them keep their honor, and let him keep his. They sat. The room exhaled. The war stepped forward again. Holloway stared at her, blindsided that the room had obeyed a woman he had sent to retype the annex. "What did you just say to them?" he demanded, quiet and tight. Vance turned to him, and for the first time all week, she smiled. It was a small smile, and a calm one, and there was nothing warm in it at all. It was the smile of someone who has been patient for a very long time, and can see now the far edge of her patience. "I told them you were tired," she said in English, so everyone could hear it, "and that we'd all do better in the morning." She had taken the room without ever taking his chair. She went back to the wall. Holloway sat very still for a moment. Then he gathered himself, because a certain kind of man, when the floor moves under him, reaches for the thing that has always steadied him. In his case, the certainty of his own rank. He told his staff, low, that tomorrow he would meet their general personally and settle this properly. General to colonel. He would stand at the door in his uniform and greet the man as an equal, and take the talks back by the sheer gravity of who he was. In the dark window's reflection, he straightened his service jacket, set the eagle square on his shoulders, and rehearsed, silently, the handshake. The grip, the first line, the angle of the head that said equal. Behind him, almost too quiet to hear, Vance said to Halpern, "He's here." Halpern looked up. "How do you—" "The gravel," she said. She had heard the motorcade on the drive a full minute before the headlights swept the high windows. 3 vehicles, slowing. She was already looking at the door. General Victor Mraz arrived at 10 the next morning, and the room arranged itself to receive him. The American side rose. Holloway stepped forward to the center of the floor, uniform crisp, hand already extending, his whole bearing pitched to meet a general as a general's equal. This was the moment he had built in his head all night. The 2 soldiers. The handshake the cameras would never see, but the minutes would record. The talks, reclaimed by the gravity of rank meeting rank. The doors opened. Mraz came in with Vasic a step behind him. 58 years old, gray, heavy through the shoulders, with the stillness of a man who had given more orders than he could stand to remember. He wore the plain dark suit the talks required, and wore it like armor he had earned the right to set down. His eyes moved across the room once, unhurried. They passed over Holloway. Not coldly, simply, the way your eyes pass over a chair to find the person you came to see. He walked, past the extended hand, past the bright uniform, past the man in the center of the floor, who stood there with his arm out and his greeting dying in his throat. Mraz crossed the entire length of the room, 20 feet of dark stone, to the wall, to the woman in the charcoal suit who had stood there for 3 days, and he stopped in front of her. For a moment, the 2 of them only looked at each other, across no river now, across nothing at all. "Colonel Vance," General Mraz said. His English was slow and certain, each word set down like a stone laid by hand. "You kept your word at the river." A pause, weighted with 12 years and a man's whole memory of them. "I deal with you, or with no one." The room did not breathe. Gideon Halpern rose from his seat. He had waited 9 years and 3 bad postings to say a single sentence in front of the right audience, and he said it now, clearly, into the silence. "General, Colonel Vance is the chief of this delegation. She speaks for the secretary. She speaks for us." And Naomi Vance finally crossed the floor, not to the wall this time, but to the head of the table, to the chair she had left empty for 3 days, the one Holloway had taken on the first morning. She did not look at Holloway as she passed him. She did not have to. She simply walked to the seat that had been hers all along and rested one hand on its back. Holloway's face moved through its whole long fall in the space of a few seconds. First confusion. Staff, she's staff. Why is he? This is wrong. Then disbelief. The river. What river? What is the man talking about? Then recognition, all at once and all together. The map corrected by grid without notes. The clause she had caught and he had defended. The language she spoke before the interpreters could find the words. The room that had been quietly obeying her for 3 days while he gave orders to the air. The condition the other side would not say in front of him. The whole week, reread in a single instant, in the only light that made sense of it. And then the last thing, the thing that is harder than horror, because a man has to keep living inside it. Shame. He lowered his hand. The greeting he had rehearsed all night was gone. When he spoke, it was not to the general. It was to her, and it was one word, and it cost him everything he had walked in the door, believing about himself. "Colonel," Grant Holloway said. General Mraz pulled out a chair at the table. He sat. He folded his heavy hands in front of him, and he looked, across all of it, only at Naomi Vance. Now, he said, shall we end this war? That's why we're here, General, Vance answered in his language, and pulled out her chair and sat. Around the table, the opposing delegation settled with her, the cold gone out of them all at once, the way a held breath goes when the danger has passed. Vasek uncapped his pen. The neutral host's protocol officer, who had watched 100 delegations and seen everything, allowed himself the smallest smile and made a note that would never be shown to anyone. The interpreters reached for their water. The room, which had spent 3 days pointed at the wrong man, swung at last toward the right one, and the difference was visible, like a compass needle finding north after a week of spinning. And Grant Holloway, for the first time in his career, took the seat against the wall, the seat he had pointed her toward on the first morning, in the first minute, with 2 fingers and a glance. He sat in it slowly. He folded his hands. He did the one useful thing left to him, which was to begin, finally, to watch. The talks reordered around her in a single afternoon, the way a current finds its true channel the moment the dam is gone. With Vance leading openly, the work that had taken a week to stall took hours to finish. The separation line went onto the true grid. The far bank, off the valley where 4,000 people lived, the clinic safe inside the line. Clause 41, the trapdoor, the corridor that could be slammed shut on a whim. She struck and rewrote in front of the whole table, slowly, reading the new language aloud in both tongues, so that the humanitarian corridor could be closed only by joint agreement, witnessed with 72 hours' notice, or not at all. Mraz watched her do it and signed his initials beside the change without a word, because the woman rewriting it was the one American whose word he had ever had reason to trust. There were other lines to fix, and she fixed them. A prisoner exchange schedule that ran on a calendar neither side used, so that the first handover would have fallen on a holy day and been read as an insult. She moved it 2 days, and watched both delegations relax at once, neither willing to say why. A demining annex that put the clearing teams under whichever army held the ground, which meant no team would ever cross the line that mattered most. She made the teams joint, neutral flagged, escorted by both. She knew these traps the way a sapper knows ground, because she had stepped on every one of them earlier in her career, in worse rooms, with worse outcomes, and had carried the lessons out in place of the people who hadn't. It took her 1 afternoon. It had also taken her 12 years. There was no arrest. No one was led from the room. No charge was read. No investigation opened. No career ended in handcuffs. This is worth dwelling on, because it is the part the story could have gotten wrong and did not. Grant Holloway had not committed a crime. He had committed an honest error of the most expensive kind, and the cost of it was not a cell. It was the long, quiet reckoning of a proud man with his own reflection, which is a sentence no court hands down and no court can commute. He found her alone in the side room after the initialing, and he did the bravest thing a man like him can do, which is to say a true sentence about himself out loud. I read the suit and missed the soldier, Holloway said. I looked at you for 3 days, and I never once saw you. That's not on the lighting. That's on me, Colonel. He stood very straight, hands at his sides. I could request reassignment tonight, and you'd be right to sign it without a second thought. But I'd rather stay. I'd rather learn how you did that. How you took a room without ever once raising your voice. I've spent 26 years raising mine. If you'll let me, I'd like to learn the other way before I'm done. Vance studied him for a moment. She had every right to break him, and no use for the pieces. Sit in, she said. Watch the people, not the maps. A pause. The maps are easy. Anyone can learn a map in an afternoon. It took me 20 years to learn the people, and I'm still learning. And the day I think I've finished is the day I'll get someone killed. Start now. Watch who looks at whom before they speak." She turned to the young lieutenant hovering in the doorway. "Pell, you too. You noticed the empty chair at the lunch, and you said nothing. That instinct was right, and your silence was wrong. The room will always make it easy to stay quiet. Next time, the silence breaks. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Pell said, and meant it down to the floor. Some of you watching have been the quiet one in the room and the loud one in the room, in different years of your own life. If this story landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment and tell me which one you were. And subscribe, so the next story finds you. That is the whole of the ask, and then we'll finish. In the evening, when the table was empty, and the initialed pages were locked away, and the long week was finally truly over, Naomi Vance went out onto the lakeside terrace alone. The water had gone glass flat. The far shore was a low gray line, and beyond it, somewhere, was a border that would, starting at midnight, mean a little less than it had this morning. Lights had come on in the villages across the lake. People who did not know her name were cooking dinner inside a piece she had spent 12 years paying for in advance. Miraz found her there. He came out quietly for so large a man, and he stood beside her at the railing for a while without speaking. Two old enemies watching the same water go dark. Then he took something from inside his coat and held it out to her. A field cap, worn. The fabric gone soft, the seams pale with age. She knew it before her hand closed on it. She had last seen it on the head of a man carrying a child across a river 12 years ago. "We found him on our side of the line," Miraz said. "Your translator. We buried your man as one of ours, with his face to the east, the way we bury our own, with the words said over him that we say over our own. We kept this. I did not know, for 12 years, where to send it, or whether the sending would be welcome." He looked at her. "Then they told me the name of the American they could not move from the wall. And I knew." Vance held the cap in both hands. "His name was Stefan Lipa," she said. "He had a daughter. She'd be grown now." "Then she will live in a country with one less war in it," Miraz said, "because of what her father held in his hands at the end, and what you would not put down." He inclined his head, the closest a man like him came to a bow. "It is a strange thing, Colonel, to spend a war wishing you could kill someone, and a peace grateful that you could not. Good night." He went back inside. She stayed. She set Stefan's field cap on the railing beside her, and she thought, for a moment, of the phrase book squared on the desk in her quarters. The two of them reunited at last after 12 years on the wrong banks of the wrong rivers. No medal had brought the enemy general to her table. No rank had. No uniform, however crisp. No ultimatum, however loud. No career, however long. Her word had brought him. The word she had kept when keeping it cost her everything she had been promised. It was the only currency that had ever mattered in this work, and she had spent 20 years learning that it could not be borrowed and could not be faked, only earned, and only once, and only by people willing to pay its full price in the open, where both sides could see. She stood there a long time. Across the lake, the village lights held steady, one for every window, where someone was choosing to stay up a little later, now that staying up late had stopped being dangerous. Somewhere among them, perhaps, was a grown woman who had crossed a river as a child, in the arms of a man with a white cloth in his hand. Vance would never know which light was hers. That was the shape of the work. You spent your word, and your years, and sometimes your friends, and the people you spent them for went on living lives that would never once contain your name. She had made her peace with that long ago. It was, she had decided, the cleanest kind of payment there was. The lake went still. The last light left the water. And a woman no one in the room had been able to see for 3 days stood alone in the dark, having ended a war the way she had always done everything that ever counted. Quietly and completely, and for the people whose names would never be in the minutes. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.